Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that I run into routinely coaching lifters, dealing with lifters, looking at different things, and that's the number of people who really and truly think that their quads are a weak link in their squat, and they don't have a particularly strong squat yet. And a lot of people say, Jason, I think your standard's too high. What do you mean 500? Yeah, 500. And it's not that you can't have a really strong squat and be a sub 500 squatter, because you can, particularly depending on your overall size. But what I have generally found is that when guys know how to squat correctly, if our goal is a big squat, okay? If our goal is a big squat, guys who know how to squat correctly, who have a quad weakness with a sub 500 pound squat, are almost non-existent. They're almost non-existent. And I'm not saying the squat doesn't use the quads as a primary mover. And the reason we have this argument to begin with, though, is that a lot of people don't understand what we're talking about when we talk about having a big squat. Okay, if you want the biggest squat possible, you don't want your squat to be as quad dominant as possible. The issue we have there is, of course, when people want to talk about the Olympic style squatting, which is done for what purpose? Why do we do Olympic squats? To get good at the clean and jerk, right? That's why. That's the purpose of the exercise. Okay? To make you good at the front squat so that you can catch that and go into a full clean, so that you can clean and jerk in the Olympics. Okay? The Olympic squat carries over very, very, very well to the front squat, because you can only handle so much front squatting. And due to the catch position and everything else. But it builds all the musculature up to be great at front squatting. And being great at front squatting, like if you can front squat 500 pounds, that's going to be phenomenal for your clean and jerk. So you'll see that heavy focus on that. But the problem is that a lot of people see that due to that tradition, and they think that this is the way to squat if your goal is to, I don't know, get as jacked as possible, or to squat the heaviest weight possible. And it's just not the case. That style of squatting, which is going to be more quad dominant, is done for the purpose of improving the Olympic lifts. Okay, it's to win you gold medals in the Olympics, basically. So people also then assume that when we talk about a squat that isn't quad dominant, that the quads don't get used. Well, and that's not true either. That's been heavily debunked. It's been researched. We know that wide stance power squatting uses just as much quad. It's just that it uses other muscles also. We change the moment arms around, we get more hip, glute, everything else involvement. So the issue we run into is normally that those other muscles are underdeveloped. Okay, those other muscles tend to be underdeveloped, and so a lot of guys have done other things that have built their quads up. They've oftentimes done a fair amount of quad dominant squatting, or they've done other leg exercises. And if that's the case, the odds that their quads are really limiting their squat and won't just grow progressively as you get better at squatting and at supplemental lifts is relatively rare. And I'm not saying a quad weakness can't develop, because it can, but you really only see that in extreme cases. In other words, we might see a quad weakness develop with a sub 500 pound squatter if we did nothing but train for this style that I'm showing here, doing all this posterior chain stuff from day one. Like if they never ever in their life did an Olympic squat, they started their first day in the gym on a wide stance box squat, and we did good mornings and glute ham raises and reverse hypers and all these things that you see me do. If they did all of that stuff from day one, their quads might actually become a weak link at something like a 450 squat. It might actually happen, and that we might need to do a little bit of extra quad work for them at that point. You know, some step ups, some lunges, you know, some hip belt squats, extra sled work. You know, they might need that stuff at that point. But the only way that happens is if you trained extremely posterior chain dominant from your first day in the gym. And in which case, not everyone is even going to develop that weak link. Keeping in mind, guys, if we do a ton of bench pressing and we train with this style for the bench press, you're still going to have different weak links that develop from person to person. It's going to be based on your genetics and your structure and other stuff. Okay? But barring a scenario like that, because again, I can create a hypothetical where it could happen. Right? A person who just genetically doesn't have particularly good quads, starting on a system like that from day one might, and I notice I didn't say they might develop a quad weakness. Yes, it's possible. For everyone else, it's very, very unlikely. And if your quads feel like a weak link in your squat, it's probably because you don't know how to squat. Let me state that again. You don't know how to power squat. Because the quads will tend to come along quite well. And especially if you start adding the other supplemental stuff, that tends to catch them up, even if they would have developed a weakness. If you're doing your plyos and sled drags and stuff like that, it tends to resolve that anyways. So what I have found accordingly with my own lifters, I have found that when I, in the past, had a lifter try to convince me that their quads needed extra work, and I let them do extra quad work, again, at the expense of recovery, at the expense of their hamstrings and other stuff. Because it's like, if we look at those things and people say, well, couldn't they just throw it in? Well, you got a bunch of recovery left over to do a bunch of quad work. Then why aren't we using that recovery for the other muscles? Because if your quads aren't really your weak link, we're wasting recovery. We're wasting training resources on doing a bunch of quad work, a bunch of some guys front squats or whatever, being on a hack squat machine, doing step ups, doing lunges, right? We're using recovery up for these things. You could be doing glute ham raises with, right? And so invariably, when I let them do that, their squat always stalls or regresses. Like I had one of my clients, and this was, again, my gosh, a year ago, who I allowed to convince me of this, and we let him start doing more quad work. His deadlift went up, his bench went up, and his max squat went down 10 pounds. Because we continued to train the other lifts how I wanted, but he was convinced, Coach, let me do this. And I let him do the extra quad work because he pleaded and pleaded. What happened? His squat went down 10 pounds over 6 weeks. So he PR'd the other stuff. He got stronger at everything else, but his squats got weaker. Now people would say, well, how could your squats get weaker if you're training hard? Because he wasn't prioritizing the right muscles. And he detrained. His weakest links got slightly detrained and lost a tiny amount of strength. Therefore, his squat went down. And I find that to be the case because I've had it happen a couple times. I'll let a client kind of get this, and I've realized more and more, just don't let your clients convince you that way. If a guy who squats 420 tries to convince you that their quads are the weak link, you tell them no, and you put them on the right programming. This is what I've learned you have to do. And this will apply to you guys out there also. If you feel that your quads are a weak link and you're a 350 or a 400 squatter, and you're a male, not a female, you might want to reassess that and figure out how to squat better. And you probably need to find your real weak link, whether it's your hips, your hamstrings, your upper back, okay, your core. Because it probably isn't your quads. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.